Hello, my name is Joshua Mugabe. I welcome you to Theory of Evolution. What is the problem that the theory of evolution and its rival theories try to solve? The problem that the theory of evolution and simply evolution or its rival theories try to solve is to explain how different living beings that live on Earth have appeared. What is the main theory opposed to evolution? The main theory that opposes evolution theory on the explanation of how species emerged, phylogenesis, is fixism. What is fixism? Fixism is the theory about the diversity of life on Earth that affirms that the current existent species were identical to the species of the past and came out already adapted to the environment without undergoing changes. Fixism opposes evolutionism, since evolutionism is the idea that current species emerged from gradual transformation suffered by ancestral and extinct species. The religious version of fixism is called creationism. Many different forms of creationisms are found in the mythological of various religions. Modernized religions interpreters teach creationism as a metaphoric wisdom and not as opposed to evolutionism. Furthermore, it is possible to make evolution compatible with creationism by considering that God in his perfection would not create a world so full of imperfections and sufferings like our world. One can maintain the creationist belief, thinking that the world God created is another much better world, or at least not the one that we see, while admitting the imperfection of life that we see has emerged by evolution. In the scientific competition against fixism, what are the main arguments that favor evolutionism? The main arguments in favor of evolutionism are paleontological, from the study of similarities among fossils of different periods, of compared anatomy, the existence of structures with the same origin and function, and of residual organs, like in the human appendix, that reveal relationship among species of compared embryology. Similarities in structures and developmental processes among embryos of related species, of molecular biology, larger percentage of similar nucleotide sequence in DNA of species of common ancestors. What are fossils? Fossils, these are petrified vestiges of beings that lived in the past, conserved by chemical and geological processes, and found within rocks, sedimentary strata of the terrestrial crust. How does the study of fossils strengthen the theory of evolution? The study of fossils reveals ancient and extinct species having many similar structures to others of present and of the past. Fossils still allow radiative dating and estimate the periods during which species lived and to establish a chronological relationship between them. Those evidences strengthen the hypothesis of relationship and common origin among species, that their futures have modified gradually until formation of the current species. Historically, what were the two main evolutionary theories? The two main evolutionary theories were Lamarckism and Darwinism. What is meant by the law of use and disuse and the law of transmission of acquired characteristics? According to the law of use and disuse, the characteristics of the body vary as it is more or less used. This rule is varied, for example, for features like muscular mass and the size of the bones. The law of the transmission of acquired characteristics in its turn established that parents could transmit to their offsprings characteristics acquired by law of use and disuse. What is Lamarckism? Lamarckism is a theory that unites the law of use and disuse with the law of transmission of acquired characteristics. That is, that asserted that the acquired characteristics, for example, muscular mass, could be transmitted from the parent to its offspring. The theory was proposed by a French naturalist, Lamarck, in the beginning of the 19th century. At that time, the idea was not so absurd, since nobody knew how the transmission of hereditary characteristics occurred. Lamarck had a great merit in introducing an evolutionary theory based on natural law at the time dominated by fixism. Who was Charles Darwin? Charles Darwin was an English naturalist born in 1809 and considered the father of the theory of evolution. At the end of the year 1831, before turning 23 years of age, Darwin embarked as a volunteer scientist on the ship the Beagle for 5-year expedition to the South American coast and the Pacific. During the voyage, whose most famous passage was to stop in the Galapagos Islands, Darwin collected data that he used to write his master script, The Origin of Species. That was in 1859. In this book, the principle of the common ancestry of all living beings and of natural selection as the force that drives the diversity of species was described. Darwin died in 1882. The original name of the famous book written by Darwin was On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. What is the mechanism described by Darwin that eliminates species less adapted to environmental conditions? The mentioned mechanism is the natural selection. How did Darwin reach the principle of natural selection? From the observation of differences among individuals of the same species. Darwin recognized that in a same species, there were individuals with different characteristics. He also realized that those differences could lead to different survival and reproduction chances for each individual. Therefore, he discovered the importance of the environment acting upon the organism and preserving those having more advantageous characteristics for survival and more able to generate offsprings, and so he described the basis of the principle of natural selection. How did the industrial revolution in England offer an example of natural selection? One of the classic examples of natural selection is regarding the mouth of industrial zone of England in the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. As the Industrial Revolution advanced, back of the trees that moths landed became dark due to soot released from factories. The population of light moth then decreased, was substituted by the population of dark moth, since the mimicry of the dark moth in the new environment protected them from the predators. That is, they had an adaptive advantage in the new environment. The light moth in turn suffered the negative effect of natural selection for becoming more visible to the predators and were almost eliminated. In the open forest, far from the factories, however, it was experimentally verified that light moths maintained their adaptive advantage, and the dark moths continued to be more easily found by predators. What are the fundamental similarities and differences between Lamarckism and Darwinism? Both Lamarckism and Darwinism are evolutionary theories as opposed to fixism. Both admit the existence of the process that caused change in the characteristics of living beings in the past. They have, however, different explanations of those changes. Lamarckism combines the law of use and disuse with the law of transmission of acquired characteristics to explain the changes. Darwinism defends the action of the natural selection. In the time of Darwin, the results of Mendel's research on biological inheritance had not been published. Genetics was not yet developed, neither DNA or the concept of genetic mutation were known. What is the modern Darwinist theory that incorporates those bodies of knowledge? The modern Darwinist theory that incorporates knowledge of genetics and molecular biology is called Neo-Darwinism, or synthetic theory of evolution. How does the synthetic theory of evolution incorporate knowledge from genetics and molecular biology into the Darwinism? Today, it is known that variation of inherited characteristics is created by alteration of the genetic material of the individuals. More precisely, by modification or recombination of DNA molecules. Small changes in the genetic material accumulate and new phenotypical characteristics emerge. The carrier of these characteristics then are submitted to natural selection. From modern biology, it is recognized that natural selection generates in a given population an increase in the frequency of alleles and genes more favorable to survival and reproduction. Less advantageous genes and alleles tend to be eliminated. Using the concept of variability, environmental pressure, and natural selection, how does the synthetic theory explain Darwinian natural selection? Genetic variability occurs from recombination of chromosomes during sexual reproduction and from DNA mutation in the germ cells and the gametes. Such variability creates individuals who are carriers of some new phenotypical characteristics compared to their ancestors. These individuals are submitted to the environmental pressure and can be more or less well succeeded concerning survival or reproduction. The better succeeded transmit their genetic patrimony to the larger number of descendants, increasing the frequency of their genes in the population. Those less well succeeded tend to transmit their genes in smaller number of descendants, decreasing the frequency of their genes in the population, or even becoming extinct. This process is called natural selection, preservation of organisms that present more adapted phenotypes for the environmental pressure they face. In hospitals, where many tuberculosis patients are treated, the population of tuberculosis microbacteria may be constituted to multi-resistant to antibiotics strains. How does synthetic theory of evolution explain this fact? The appearance of multi-resistant strain of pathogenic parasite in the hospital, for example, multi-resistant tuberculosis bacteria, can be explained by synthetic theory of evolution. In any environment, TB bacteria in the hospital undergo changes in their genetic material. In the hospital environment, however, they suffer continuous exposition to antibiotics. Many of them die by the antibiotic action, but carriers of mutations that provides resistance to those antibiotics proliferate freely. These resistant microorganisms, when subjected to other antibiotics, again under natural selection, of those which are better resistant to those drugs, are preserved and proliferate. The strain of multi-resistant, non-treatable mutant bacteria emerge in hospitals. The use of antibiotics is a factor that promotes natural selection and emergence of multi-resistant bacteria. This is the reason why hospitals often have committees that control the use of antibiotics. What is reproductive isolation? Living organisms are considered under reproductive isolation when they cannot cross among themselves, or if they can cross, but cannot generate fertile offsprings. What is the relationship between the concept of reproductive isolation and the concept of species? Reproductive isolation is an important concept because it defines the concept of species. Only living beings that can cross among themselves and generate fertile offsprings, i.e., that are not under reproductive isolation, belong to the same species. For example, humans and chimps are under reproductive isolation and are not of the same species. What is speciation? Speciation is the process by which different species emerge from a common ancestral species. Speciation generally begins when populations of the same species become geographically isolated, i.e., when they are separated by some physical barrier that disallow crossing between individuals of one population and individuals of another population. Groups that for a long time are kept under geographical isolation tend to accumulate different phenotypic characteristics from each other by means of genetic variability, that is mutation and recombination, and natural selection. When these differences reach a point that makes the crossing of individuals of one group with individuals of another group impossible, or the generation of the fertile offspring no longer happen, it is said that speciation has occurred. Why does geographical isolation lead to speciation? Geographical isolation between groups of the same species leads to the formation of new species, since it disallows crossing among isolated individuals. Distinct characteristics from other groups are incorporated by genetic variability and natural selection into the isolated group until emergence of a new species. So, geographical isolation creates the reproductive isolation. How can the fact that fishes and dolphins have similar organs and similar genotype be explained? Fish and dolphin, they have similar organs and shape. This is because although they are phylogenetically distinct ancestors, they face similar environmental pressures since they share the same habitat, which is water. So, by undergoing genetic variability and natural selection, some similar features, for example, hydrodynamic body and the presence of fin, were incorporated into these animals. What is adaptive convergence? Adaptive convergence is a phenomenon by which living beings facing the same environmental pressure or problems and undergoing genetic variability and natural selection incorporate similar, that is analogous, organs and structures into their bodies during evolution. For example, fins and the hydrodynamic body of fish and dolphin, phylogenetically distant animals. What is adaptive radiation? Adaptive radiation is the appearance of several other species from one common ancestral species that have spread to various regions or environments. The different characteristics among species correspond to adaptive necessity of the ecological niches of each one occupies, i.e., to different environmental pressures. What is the difference between analogous and homologous organs? Characteristics of different species are said to be analogous when having the same biological function. For example, wings of birds and wings of insects. Characteristics of different species are said to be homologous when having the same biological origin, i.e., when they are product of differentiation of the same characteristic from a common ancestor, like cat paws and human feet. Characteristics of different species may be analogous or homologous. Thank you very much for participating in the theory of evolution. Please do like, share, and subscribe.